Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about honorifics, or the honorable form of Japanese. And before we talk about the actual, like how to make it, we're going to discuss usage. Step back and kind of think about how it's used. And with the honorable, it's or honorific, excuse me. There's a few different ways of describing it, and you usually hear it referred to as, I'm not quite sure why it's written twice up above, sorry about that. Usually hear it referred to as keigo or son keigo. Keigo or son keigo. Usually people hear keigo, just like the person that said oh no in the Discord chat. And in the English, sometimes people call it honorific speech or honorable or respectful speech. And there's a few things that you need to understand. First, up until now, we've talked about two different levels. We've talked about, I'm going to type these out in the channel, the polite speech, and then below that, we have the casual speech. Now, both the casual form and the polite form, they don't really make any reference to the levels of the people talking. By that I mean both polite speech and casual speech do not really say, oh, the person I'm speaking to is above me or below me in terms of social levels. And when I say social levels, what I'm talking about is, a different social level would be, for example, a parent and a child talking. The parents are above the children, so to speak, or a teacher and students, or an employee and a customer. And last, but not last, but one of the last main categories is, say, a boss or someone above you at work. In each of these situations, you, the speaker, are lower than the other person. If you're an employee and you're speaking to your boss, let's say you're at the normal level, then your boss is above you. And what the honorific form does is it takes that and you use it to refer to other people. You don't talk about yourself, you talk about other people, and by using that, whoever you're talking about, you're saying, I'm taking you and I'm saying that you're more important than me, or you're at a higher level than I am. You are raising them up, basically. And really remember that, if nothing else, I'm raising them up, because we're going to learn next week that there's something else that you can create that distance by lowering yourself. You can make yourself lower, or you can push them up. And in this case, we are pushing them up. And so we just talked about, the different categories. But again, someone of higher status, it might be official status, it might be a social status, that's defined by, say, family, grandparents aren't technically higher than parents, but you might use this to speak to grandparents, possibly. Or again, if you're a worker and you're speaking to a customer that comes in. And we have similar things in English and other languages. Our language changes slightly when we speak to a boss. We don't say, hey boss, how's it going? You say, yes sir, yes ma'am, or whoever, the reports have been finished. You might not say the reports are done, you might say the reports have been finished. And we use, in English at least, we use different tones, we use different words to convey a level of formality. In Japanese, it's much more clear cut. The verbs change. The verbs change a lot, actually. And yes, it can also be used, I mentioned this, for people that you really respect. And this might be, say, a grandparent that you might use this with. Or if you want to be extra polite. Now, you might think to yourself, oh, this is, something I should use all the time because that, makes everyone else feel more important. And that's not the case. There are times to use it, But if you use it all the time, you are creating often a bit of a distance between you and the other person, because you're not saying they're your level, you're saying they're above your level. And so it does have a strong formality to it. That if you started using this with your friend, they would say, what's going on? Oh, why are you talking to me that way? Now, with us as learners, as non-native speakers, we should always strive to be closer and closer to a native speaker in our language. However, most of the time we can use polite form and be okay. And there's a bit of an understanding from a Japanese speaker that Keigo is hard for Japanese people. So a Japanese person, when they start working, and especially if it's a customer-facing job role, at work, they probably need to study a bit to make sure, okay, this is the way I should say these things to a customer. And so it's tricky for Japanese people as well. It's not just us. So we as foreigners get a bit of a pass, if we make mistakes or if we choose not to use it, but you should try. When the opportunity comes up, you should give it a try. Now, we talk about this is used to, raise other people up, so we do not want to use it for ourselves. There's nothing good that could come out of that. You have probably seen, this isn't really honorific speech in the verb sense, but you've probably seen in anime or manga something like this. That's someone that is very self-centered and they think that they're the best thing. They might say something, a man or a male-facing person might say, ore-sama. Sama is the suffix you use in a very polite, formal situation for someone else. But you wouldn't say it about yourself unless you want everyone to know that you think that you're the best. And this honorific speech is exactly the same way. I wouldn't recommend it. Now, this is the thing that scares people. And hopefully it'll be slightly less scary by the time we're done with it. There are a lot of ways to use honorific forms. And we're going to start with the easiest. We're going to kind of work our way up. For most of the verbs that we have, and the hard part comes from it's not all. So you have to remember which falls into which category. Most of the verbs, it's relatively easy. And what you have in front of the screen is the form that you use. You take the verb stem, and just as a refresher, let's try and remember what the verb stem is. If I say, let's have a really simple word, tabemasu. Tabemasu, what's the verb stem there? Anyone? It's tabe. The verb stem in a more technical definition is this. Let me type it out for you. It's the mas form without the mas. It's like a cheeseburger without cheese. So if you have tabemas, it's tabe. If you have nomimas, it's nomi. If you have, here's a kind of a hard one. What's the verb stem for suru? Shi. Yeah, it's tiny. Or if you have ao, real fast. Let's practice a few of these. What's the verb stem for ao? What's the verb stem for? I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I'm not going to say it. So let's get a little bit of kanji practice in there. Some simple kanji. What about that one? Okay, and let's try one more. One more. Good. So these are your verb stems. To make the honorific form, you take that O, and you've seen this O before. You've seen the O put in front of certain nouns to make them a bit more polite. It's the same one. And just in case you're curious, this is what the O looks like in kanji. It's this nice little, a whole bunch of strokes jammed into a tiny space. And sometimes, for example, if you are referring to a customer, the simplest way to refer to a customer is Kyaku. There's no formality there whatsoever. If you want to step it up a little bit, you'd say kyaksan. If you want to jump even further, you'd say okyaksan. And that O is the O above. It's the same O we're using. And depending on what you're looking at, sometimes the O is in hiragana, sometimes the O, especially if it's a typed document, the O will be in that crazy kanji. And just in case you weren't confused enough, sometimes that kanji, it means go as well. It has the same meaning. It can be O, sometimes it can be go. Today, let's focus on the O. But anyway, we take the verb stems and we put O verb stem ni naru. And naru, this is the same verb that we've used, to say to become. As in, I was sick, but I became energetic again. I became genki again. Genki ni narimashita. It's the same one. So if you want to think of it kind of in a really literal way, this formation we're talking about is almost like they became the state of leaving or reading or whatever. So if we have dekakeru, to head out, it would be odekake ni naru. If we had yomu, it would be oyomi ni naru. So let's practice a few more. We did just the stems before, so let's step it up just a little bit. And just for kicks, I'm going to use verbs that you probably wouldn't use in the polite form, but please give me the keigo version of these verbs. You don't need to conjugate it out to narimasu or whatever. Just give me the base forms. How about this one? Osu. If you need to talk about your boss pushing something, how would we say, oh, yes, the president pushed the rock, I guess. This one's actually a trick question. I didn't realize it until give me the full keigo version. One person got really close. This answer that just got typed is the correct one. Although if you look at it without the kanji, there's actually two O's in front of one another. Okay, let me give you one that was not intentional, but let me give you one that is a bit easier. Let's see. How about, I'm avoiding the special verb, so you might be wondering why I'm not choosing some of the easy ones. How about, let's use the one we had before. Tsukuru. You're close. There's something on the front. Don't forget to put that thing on the front. There we go. Otsukuri ni naru. Otsukuri ni narimasu. And there's one person that has their mic on. You might want to turn your mic off. Thank you. And let's keep going. So these forms, and let me give you some examples. Here we go. Here's some nice long ones. You see we're getting more and more kanji in our sentences, but the furigana is there just in case you need it. And I'm going to talk about that English just below in just a second. I'm going to skip past it, and we're going to come back to it. But let's look at the examples first. So, boss, shacho. And I'm the shacho of Renshu, but there's no one in my company because it's just me and my wife that could speak to me in this way. There's no one below me or above me. But let's say Kao-chan was a employee and Kao-chan was talking about me leaving. Kao-chan might say this. Shacho wa odekake ni narimashita. So if we look at this in the base form, let's say for some reason Kao-chan was speaking about me in using just my name. They would say this. Maiko wa dekakemashita. That's what we're saying. We're just saying it with lots of extra syllables. And it's kind of a running joke slash cry for help that in Japanese, the more polite or more honorific you get, the longer your sentences become. The opposite of that is the more casual you get, the shorter your Japanese becomes. So here, you're saying, oh, the president, the CEO has left, and we're using the, once you get that naru on the end, you conjugate the naru the same way you would use it, regardless. Here, we said narimashita, so maybe Kao-chan is talking to a customer, a visitor. And so you would not say, oh yeah, the president's out. You'd say the president has left. You'd say more polite, you'd use the mashita as well. So in this case, let's think about the odekake ni naru. That's referring to the actions of the president. The president is above us, status-wise, and so we're using the honorific form. However, the sentence as a whole, we're using in the polite form because we're talking to someone and we're at equal level. We're keeping it polite. However, let's take a look at the next one. 大好きな作家が私の方のお嫁になる. So maybe you're an aspiring author, you're trying to read, and there's this other author who you love, and they're going to read some of your book. Maybe they're going to read a chapter of it before they do a reading of their book at a local bookstore. Now, this author you love, you're putting them way up above you, you're going to use the honorific to describe them. However, you're talking to your friend, and like you typically, you use a casual form when you're talking to friends. And so the sentence itself is in a casual form, oyomi ni naru. However, the action of the author is getting that honorific treatment. I hope you're good so far. And I haven't said this in a while, but I want to remind you that especially verb conjugations in Japanese, you can understand it on a level, say, okay, that makes sense. But at the same time, if I said, hey, start producing this language, you'd say, absolutely not. No, thank you. I could never do this. And that's not a failing on your part. That's not saying, oh, I'm so bad at learning. Like, I can't pick up the honorific in 15 minutes. What does that make you? That makes you the same as every other learner. Honorific is difficult. It's easy to think, oh, they're above me. So conceptually, it's not hard. However, remembering all these ways of, changing the ordering or the structure of the verbs, it is difficult. And so don't beat yourself up about it. You will get there. Now, up until now, with polite verbs and casual verbs, we've only had two verbs that we would consider irregular. And which two verbs are those, by the way? Can anyone remember? What are our two verbs that every time we conjugated, it was something different? It's like, this verb is special. Kuru is one of them. What's the other one? Kuru suru. Yes. And they're also special here, but they are not the only ones. There's 14 of them, actually. There's 14, and we're not going to look at them quite now. We might take a look at the end of the lesson, and you can tap this inside of Renshu, or if you go into Renshu's dictionary, and over here you search for honorific. Honorific. Oh, it doesn't come up. Okay, let's try Kegel. There we go. You've got all of them here. Oh, it's respectful. I wrote respectful in here. That's why. So they're all listed in here. So if you'd like to take a look at them, feel free to do so. And you'll notice, hey, some of these are really common. These are really, miru, iku, kuru, These are all ones that come up all the time. And so what's tricky is that the irregulars are the most common ones. In fact, none of these words are ones that you hear rarely. So do you need to know these? Absolutely yes. You do need to know them. Will you pick them up immediately? No. And that's fine. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll show you a quick way to add these to your Renshu schedule so you can get more practice out of them. So we're going to talk about a few of them. Not all of them, but a few of them. And right now, we're just focusing on the English that's below, not the sentences above. But iru, iku, and kuru, for reasons unknown, they all become the same thing. They all become the same thing. All of them use this. Irasharu. So if you're talking about your boss being here, or your boss having gone somewhere, or your boss having come to wherever you happen to be, in all of those, you're going to use irasharu. Or you can use oide ni naru. However, irasharu is by far the most common. And I'm going to pop this up inside Renshu just so you know where to get to it. If you look this word up in Renshu, inside of Renshu, we've got this here. If you ever tap this thing, it usually tells you, oh, this is a Godan verb or it's an Ichidan verb or whatever. This will give you the conjugation tables. So for everything, including some that may not really happen. But if you look at these top ones, you can see, oh, here's how you do polite, here's how you do casual. And on top of irasharu being this verb you have to remember, it's also a quote-unquote special verb in that, look at it, look at the very first one. It ends with a ru, which usually means we chop off the ru and add mas, or we change the ru to a ri and add mas. But not with this one. It's irashaimasu. Irashaimasu. So, again, conceptually, not too tricky. But remembering all these spelling changes, it takes time. But this form, you will see a lot. You will see quite a lot. Irashaimasu. So, if we're talking about the boss, and someone says, is the boss here? Is the CEO here right now? And you could use this. You could say, yes, shacho wa irashaimasu. The CEO is here. If you could say, oh yeah, the boss left, not the dekakeru, but just the went, you'd use the same verb. And you might change it to the past tense. And you might be thinking, well, how do you know which one it is? The thing is you would, and Wizard, I'll get to your question in a minute. You never speak this simply. You never just say, shacho wa irashaimasu. You say, oh, they are going somewhere. You add the particle and the location. And so with the rest of a natural sentence, you'll get a better feel for what's going on. And oide ni naru is, you see this coming up with iku sometimes, or yuku, which is another form. And the person, I'm going to mention these all at the end. If we have time, we should have time. But with iterashai, and with these other ones, taberu and nomu, I would collapse them together and kind of think of them as to consume food or drink, and they both become meshiagaru. They both become meshiagaru. plus all the other ones that we had. There's one more worth mentioning. Kureru is kudasaru in the honorific. And you have seen, this is also one of those special verbs, the same way with irasharu. So, hey, what's the stem form of this one? It's actually kudasai. So that might make a little light bulb appear over your head and say, oh, when I say kudasai, I'm actually saying something along the lines of you, the person you're talking to, you're raising them up above you and you're saying, please give me something. That's where the kudasai comes from. Is you're taking that kureru, which is to receive something from someone, and you're using a form of that to say, hey, please. But you're bringing them up a level. And so, like I mentioned, these all are quote unquote special verbs. Irashaimasu, osharu, which is how you say someone said something. And this is often the case because think about it. If you're talking about a customer, you say, oh, the customer said they wanted this. Or the president said that next week we're starting sale of this new thing. Repeating, what someone else said is a very common thing. And so you also hear this osharu often. So I was talking to someone yesterday, talking to a doctor, and I said something like this. And I had some more after this, but I'm not going to, it's a bit more difficult. But I said, sensei ga oshatta. So what the doctor said. The doctor is above me, and so I use this form to describe that. Now, the suru form changes. Someone mentioned it earlier. It is nasaru, which again is special, nasaimasu. And kudasaru, again, kudasaimasu. So conceptually, not bad. Spelling changes, wow, there's a lot of them. And you won't get all this at once. Now, a few more things. Hopefully we have some more light bulbs jumping into your head. This one's just talking about changing the re to an e. But, you've probably heard this irashai, where if you've been to Japan before, or if you've watched anime or read manga, where do you hear irashai? Where do you hear that? It's spoken, just that one word. Irashai. Irashai. Yeah, when you welcome someone into a restaurant or a store often. There's one more form. What's the other form? It's irashai plus a little bit added after that. Yes, thank you. Irashaimase. That's all coming from this form of, it's kind of like a welcome. And they're welcoming you. They're not literally saying welcome. They're almost like saying, hey, you're here. There you are, person above me, because you're a guest, you're a customer. In the same way, someone asked a little bit earlier, if you... These are always tricky. If they're easier to say, well, let me type it out. That iterashai that you say when people take off, like they leave. It's like, okay, bye, iterashai. You're more literally saying ite irashai. And what does ite irashai mean? You're actually saying ite, like ite kuru, to go and to come back. But they're taking the kuru form and they're changing it to the honorific. So it's like ite irashai. That's hard to say. So people usually just say ite irashai. So it's a standard phrase that you use when someone's like going off and coming back. Ite irashai. but it's a bit more honorific. So you can see all these come back, a lot of these stock phrases that we use, and when you learn them, you just learn them as that phrase, but they have their roots in honorific language. Kudasai as well, we talked about that. And something like tabenasai, eat. It's not please eat, it's not that polite, but that nasai originally came from this nasaru, to do. It's like do the eating, if you want to look at it in a more literal sense. But a lot of common Japanese is based on this honorific language. But it's been boiled down over the years and the centuries into these phrases that don't have necessarily a clear relationship, but they came from these at one point. So that aside, though, the sentences themselves don't change that much. The structure doesn't change exactly. And I see a mistake in here, and I'm going to fix this after the lesson's done. I apologize for that, but I'll mention it in just a second. So, you have sentences such as this. If you want, are you going to eat natto? And this might be, at a restaurant where the server or the wait staff is talking to the person eating. And they say, are you going to eat natto? If so, I'll bring it out. It's kind of the subtext. And so, natto meshiagarimasu ka? Will you eat? But you're saying it in a very polite, honorific way. Now this next one, let me say there is a mistake in here. It's just a tiny conjugation mistake, probably in Renshu's code that I'll fix. But can anyone, without me saying it, can anyone guess what the mistake is? There's one verb that's not quite what it should be. Yes, because before kudasai, you always have the te form. So this should be kore o goran ni natte kudasai. And goran ni naru is one of those special verbs. It was in that list. Goran ni naru is to look. Look at something. Now, very interesting. There's another casual command form that you hear a lot. And I'm not sure if we have an explicit page for it in Renshu, but I hear it often, especially when talking to children. But it comes from this. There's a goran form where if you say, try doing something. It's like, try doing this, try reading this, try writing this. You could say like, yatte goran. And it means like, give it a try. And you hear often with language directing at younger people, from parents, what have you. But yes, it should be the te kudasai form. And if you'll give me just a minute so I can write a quick message. But I apologize for that. So let me type out. Yatte mite is a bit more standard or stock Japanese. Yatte goran, I wouldn't say, like yatte mite, you could say towards your friend. Let's say you're 20 years old and your friend is 20. You could say yatte mite, give it a try. But I wouldn't say necessarily yatte goran. I hear teachers saying this. I hear parents saying it a lot. But yatte goran would be more common with someone at a lower age than you. And you're explicitly creating that distance, between, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But if you're a teacher or you're a parent, go nuts. Use this. Otherwise, you're not going to hear it quite as much. Now, with this last sentence, again, this is, a sentence that we are probably familiar with. And let me give you kind of a more common example. You might say something like this. Kare wa nani o iimashita ka? What did he say? But instead of kare, we're talking about a teacher. And so we're taking that action and we're bumping it up to the honorific. And just like before, remember that with this, the imashita, we change it to the oshatta, but that's just referring to the actions of the subject. The sentence itself, though, this might be something that you ask your friend because it has a very casual no question marker at the end of it. So the conjugation of the sentence can be used, to show the relationship between you and the listener. But the verbs themselves are used to mark the elevated status of the subject. Now, if this wasn't enough, we have a little bit more for you. We're gonna get this all out at once, and then slowly, it'll take time, but slowly this will all sink in. We have des, and with des, it, like everything else, it has its own rules, and you either see dearu, which is very common in written language, very common. You might also see de gozaru, and if you are an anime fan of a very specific anime series that came out a long time ago, can anyone think of an anime character that uses de gozaru a whole lot in every other sentence he says? In fact, this particular anime series, yes, just had a reboot recently. But yes, Kenshin. If you've ever seen Rurouni Kenshin, he speaks in a very, very honorific tone towards everyone. He puts everyone above him. And it's not just him, it's characters in a lot of shows. But you hear that de gozaru a lot. And that's just the des. It's the des form in, an honorific way. So des uses aru, gozaru. So if it's, let me give you some examples to make it make more sense. Excuse me. Gozaru is closer to this one. Whoops. So if you say, yes, we have something, and the most common times you hear this happen is when you're dealing with whether or not something exists or something is present. And so I believe some examples are coming up, but let me give you an example. If you go to a store and say, hey, do you have the new Pokemon cards that just went on sale today? And they probably laugh at you because they say, of course we don't. Those are all out by this time. You might say this. Like if I go into a store, I might ask this. Pokemon card wa arimasu ka? That's my question. Now I'm speaking to the staff, and so I keep a polite tone, but I'm not really elevating them so much. If they said, yes, we do, they would use this gozaru form. Usually you might say arimasu, but instead they're keeping it very formal. They'd say, hai gozaimasu. Yes, we do have it. So aru becomes gozaru. The de gozaru that you see up on the screen is used in the same way that des is used. And so let's go back to the Pokemon cards. Let's say you don't know anything about them, but your kid likes them. So you go to the store and you say, oh, where are the Pokemon cards? And they point to something, and they might say this. Kochira wa Pokemon card de gozaimasu. Here, this is the Pokemon, these are the Pokemon cards. If you ever go to a ryokan in Japan, one of those Japanese style hotels, and you have one of the meals, as part of the package that you have there, you will hear this over and over and over again. Because everything they bring out, they'll say, oh, this is the soup, the soup contains this and this and this, and oh, this is this is salmon. And they'll use that de gozaimasu on the end of everything. Now, it's interesting to know, if you see below, that again, we see this honorific popping up. Both arigatou gozaimasu comes from this gozaimasu here. And arigato itself, there's a bit more in it that I'm not going to get into right now, but arigato is showing a form of appreciation. So it's almost closer to like, I have appreciation for what you did. That's what the gozaimasu is. And ohayo gozaimasu is closer to ohayo. You can kind of hear hayai as in early. So it's all a long time ago. It's kind of like, hey, it's early. And over time, it's turned into this morning thing. Oh, it's morning. Good morning. So again, this gozaru, gozaimasu, it all has its stems. They all have their stems in this honorific language. So just a few examples. Again, if you're at a restaurant and the waiter brings it out, and this can be at a regular restaurant, they'll say this when they hand them out to you. Even though you know exactly what you ordered, they'll still tell you. They'll say, これはoyakodonでございます. And if you don't know what oyakodon is, dons are always bowls of rice with something on top. And oyako, which it's a crazy name because it means parent and child. And which parent and child are we speaking of? We're talking about chicken and eggs. So if you have chicken and then like egg on top of it, getting the whole family so you can eat it all at once, that would be your oyakodon. We're not done. We have the last one, and then you can all say, oh, we're finally finished. This one, I feel, is actually the easiest because it doesn't take anything new. The passive voice that we learned earlier, you can also use this for the honorific form. And the interesting thing about this is that with this one, you can actually use it, if you want, in place of all those other crazy verbs that we had. So if you remember, before we had kuru, and I said, oh yeah, the special verb is irasharu. But if you say, screw that, I don't remember that, and I'm in a pinch, let me just use the passive form. You take the kuru, and it becomes the korareru, and you can use that as well. Now, the thing to note here is when you use the passive voice, up until now, the passive voice always was used to refer, the subject. To give you an example, if you're talking about a building that was built last year, you'd say, この建物は去年建てられました. Let me say that one more time, a bit more slowly. このビルは去年建てられました. You would say the building was built, or this building was built last year. And here, the subject, the person or people or company that actually built it, they're not in there. So the usual passive voice, the subject or the topic, is what's receiving the action. However, when you're talking about the honorific sentences, as you see on the screen, it's not like that. It's like your standard sentence. The subject, the doer, comes at the front, and then you use the passive voice to kind of push them up a little bit. So here, if you say, 社長が会社に来られます, the CEO will come to the company or the company building. You don't have to do any of that crazy flipping around. You just take the verb, switch it into passive, and all of a sudden it's an honorific form. So it's kind of nice. In a pinch, it works. And it's not that you are being not quite as honorific as if you were using the other ones. I don't feel like there's a nuance there to where, oh, I'm sorry, I could have raised you up even higher with irasharu, but I forgot and I'm using korareru. You don't have to worry about that. Most people tend to use those special verbs, and then once you remember them, they're kind of stuck in there, but you can use these as well. So like I said, if the boss is coming, you could use this. Or if you talk about, you know, a customer doing something, let's say driving a car, maybe a test drive, you could say, oh, kuruma o unten saremashita. And I think with the comment that was just made, as not proper keigo in certain circles, I would argue that there are people like that in every language where they're very strict about the rules. And I would presume those same people are probably not too, they're not big fans of the general trend for something like this, saying tabenai desu over tabemasen. They're saying that's not correct Japanese. You know, correct Japanese is you say it the full way. And so it's important to know that, you know, these different ways exist. And when it comes to how it's actually spoken, you're going to see variations and, you know, language changes. And so and the same thing happens in English and in many other languages where you see shifts, and some people say, you know, this isn't proper. You know, this isn't the way it should be. We have something called dangling participles in English, where some people will say this is just you can't do this, absolutely not. But they've entered common usage in English, and they're accepted and understood by the overwhelming majority of people. But some people, I'm not saying this is good or bad, will say the way that this was written, it has to be that way. But no, it's good to know, you know, all of them, because you will see all of them. If you choose to stick with the passive forms, that doesn't mean other people are going to do the same thing. So it's worth getting those, you know, into your head and knowing them, because you're going to hear them and see them. Anyway, we didn't have a lot of time to practice today just because there was so much content that we had to cover. And for those of you, if any of you are crying because there's so much honorific, don't worry. Like I said, it is tough for Japanese people, especially ones that are kind of entering the adult world when you're in the high school or university and you're starting, okay, this is my first job. Wait, I have to use keigo? I've never used keigo in my life. What do I do? And making that switch over is a tough one for everyone. But you can do it, and you will do it. So I hope this helped everyone a little bit. Look at this video afterwards. Take your time. Look at it, you know, slowly, and you'll get there. And I did mention this before, as non-native speakers, we are given a bit of a pass in real life situations when it comes to not, you know, having difficulty in using this, but you shouldn't rely on that. You know, it's nice knowing that you won't be, you know, condemned if you use it the wrong way, but you should push slowly but surely into being able to use these, you know, when the timing is right. But yes, the video will be available here in the Discord, on the inside of the Renshu app, and on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out later on. And hopefully this helped you out. Next week, we'll be talking about humble verbs, which are slightly easier, I feel. And they're going in the other direction. Instead of pushing the other person up, you are doing the same thing by lowering yourself, you know, humbling yourself. But thank you again. And I hope to see you next time. Bye.